Distinguished delegates, on Wednesday, August 25, sorry. Excellency, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to call this meeting to order. Distinguished delegates, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Today, we convene a plenary for three purposes. First, to assess the progress of our work, we'd like to begin by hearing a report back from the co-leads of the contact group on agenda item 4 and 5 that have been meeting in the last days. Second, under agenda item 4, we will open the floor for intervention by a representative of major stakeholder groups who have not delivered a statement on item 4 so far. Each statement will not exceed 4 minutes. We will then open the floor to some observers, time permitting. The statement should not exceed 2 minutes. Third, under agenda item 4, we will start a first reading of the draft decision to provide an opportunity for initial feedback on this matter. We will now like to invite the Secretariat to give us some information on the use of the microphone and on accessing documents from the website. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Good day, dear colleagues. As you are here, you have successfully joined the session, but I wish to point out that to join all plenary sessions, you will always need to connect to the working group homepage on the CBD website by clicking Join or through the meeting calendar. We ask you not to save the Interactive link into your browser, as plenaries and contact groups are different meetings. Therefore, we kindly ask you always to join the meeting from the working group homepage. Then from the calendar, select the session you wish to attend, followed by the type of connection you need for the session, whether it is speaker or viewer. As you have been informed through the scenario note, plenary sessions will be recorded and streamed online, and statements submitted in writing will be posted online unless the Secretariat is informed otherwise. The CBD Secretariat has developed an online application that allows countries and organizations to upload their statements to the meeting page. It is highly recommended that participants use this tool instead of emailing their statements, as it helps streamline the meeting process and facilitates the work of the interpreters. We will still, however, continue to monitor the email address statements@cbd.int. Please be sure to include the name of your country or organization and the agenda item on the first page of the document that is uploaded. It greatly facilitates the work of the interpreters if you can upload your statements in advance of delivery. However, they will only be posted on the website after delivery. In any case, statements as well as any associated recommendations for text changes must be posted within 12 hours of the closure of the session, of the plenary session, where the agenda item is addressed, if they are to be considered in the further work of the body on that item. Uploading instructions were included in your priority pass email, along with your dedicated link, which leads you directly to the upload page. Please note that plenary sessions will become active for you to connect 90 minutes before start time. As per the informal sessions, the Secretariat will provide technical training and testing 60 minutes before plenary. Requests for the floor by parties will be heard for each agenda item. Statements by other governments, stakeholder groups, or other observers will also be heard as time allows. Statements on each agenda item for parties and observers will be limited to 5 minutes on behalf of regions and groups and 3 minutes for individual parties. For major groups, each statement is limited to 4 minutes, and for individual non-parties and other observers to 2 minutes, as time allows. Please remember that as you speak, your interventions in plenary are being translated into 5 other official UN languages by a dedicated team of interpreters. In order to facilitate their challenging work and make sure that we can all understand each other, please keep the following in mind. Keep background noise to a minimum. You can do this by wearing noise-canceling headsets and microphone sets. Please mute your electronic devices and notifications. Check your sound using your own voice before joining the session, and upload your statements before delivery rather than after. If any speaker encounters connectivity issues that prevent them from making their statements, they should contact the Secretariat to make alternative arrangements. The list of all pre-registered participants is available online at the link you can see on the screen. Regarding the use of the online session, when the chair opens the floor for interventions, if you wish to speak, please press the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen, which will turn yellow. Your requests will be entered in the queue list visible to the chairs. When the chair gives you the floor, the moderator will activate your microphone and the status bar will turn red on your computer. Please wait a few seconds after the status bar turns red and then start speaking. In the event that the chair gives you the floor to speak and you have not raised your hand, please press the raise hand button so that the moderator can see you on the list and activate your microphone, turning the status bar to red and enabling you to speak. We would also like to remind participants that the chat box is for brief communication, mainly regarding any need for technical support, and therefore to keep your remarks here short. Please note that the co-chairs will not be viewing the chat function. The Secretariat will be monitoring the chat function and communicating with the co-chairs as needed. The time for statements is limited. A clock is provided for you on the screen to help you manage your time, but please speak clearly and slowly and not speed up your reading. Rather, when speaking, please pause between sentences to make it easier for interpreters and delegates to follow you. Also, please note that towards the mid-session, the chairs will announce a 15-minute break. There is no need to log off during this time. Finally, in our efforts to continuously improve our services to participants, the Secretariat is pleased to inform you that a virtual display table is at your disposal for the duration of the meetings. Parties and observers are invited to make use of the display table to share publications, information materials, and events that relate to the issues being addressed by the working group. To consult these announcements and for information on how to submit an announcement, click on the tab Virtual Display Table located on the right-hand side of the web portal of the working group meetings. Thank you, Co-Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. Distinguished delegate, we would like to bring to your attention that as Contact Group 1 has just concluded their session, they will report a little bit back later in the plenary, and therefore we will not follow the numerical order. We will now hear from the Contact Group, beginning with Contact Group on Agenda Item 4 on the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. We will begin with Contact Group 2, which is focusing on Target 1 to 8, reducing threats from biodiversity under Agenda Item 4. This group is being chaired by co-leads Teona Karchava of Georgia and Mr. Alfred Oteng Yeboah of Ghana. I would like to give the floor to Mr. Alfred Oteng Yeboah of Ghana. Mr. Alfred Oteng Yeboah, you have the floor. I know that Alfred was testing his system earlier. I heard him and it was working very well. I don't see Alfred.
No.
Perhaps in the interest of time, can I ask the other co-chair, Teona Kachava, to deliver the update? Do we see Teona connected?
Yes, she's raised her hand. If the moderator could give her the microphone, please. And I think she might have to turn on her camera. Thank you. Moderator, could you give Georgia the floor, please?
All right. We seems to have difficulty with this contact group, and I'm wondering whether we should not be moving on to the next contact group.
Let's try, and then we can come back.
Okay, so let's go to contact group number 4. Contact group number 4 was led by Ann Teller of the European Union and Jorge Murillo of Colombia, and they looked at target 14 to 21, as well as section H to K. So I see the European Union raising their hand, so I suspect this is Ann Teller. Ann Teller, you have the floor.
Thank you. Can you hear me properly?
Very well.
Thank you, Chair. So indeed, I'm one of the 2 colleagues for Contact Group 4 with Jorge Murillo from Colombia. So Contact Group 4 was tasked to review targets 14 to 21 and sections H to K of the first draft of the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. At its first meeting on Friday, 27 August, delegates shared their views on target 14 and 15 and proposed a range of specific textual amendments and additions. But in light of the slow progress made during the first session, and in order to save time at the second meeting, we invited participants to submit their textual proposals in advance via email. Based on the submissions received, we prepared, with the support of the Secretariat, a non-paper which was made available on the website on Sunday. The second session, on Monday, 30th of August, thus based its work on a non-paper which incorporated the progress already made on targets 14 and 15 and included a compilation of the submission received and composite text for each target and section, bringing all the suggested change together. Following the guidance of the Bureau, the contact group at its second meeting did not consider the composite text. However, pending further guidance from the Bureau, the co-chairs of Contact Group 4, the colleagues, of Contact Group 4, decided to keep the composite text in the revised non-paper for information of participants. The group focused therefore on reviewing the compilation of textual proposals received from parties and observers, explaining the rationale, and double-checking if the proposals were accurately included in the compilation. Parties were also invited to review and, as appropriate, support the proposal from observers. With this approach, the contact group was able to move much faster and managed to consider sections H to K, the outstanding observer submissions for target 15, as well as resume to target 16 and complete it. We are cautiously optimistic that the contact group will, at its last session on Thursday, 2nd of September, be able to finalize its task, ensuring a first consideration of all the targets and sections under its terms of reference. At the end of the session yesterday, parties and observers that had not yet done so were invited to submit via email their textual proposals, particularly on the remaining targets 17 to 21, by today, 5 o'clock Montreal time. We will issue a revised non-paper incorporating the additional proposal received to support this work. All the 4 contact groups on item 4 have the task to achieve real progress on the text before us, without embarking on negotiations which are meant to happen at our physical meeting. We also have a considerable amount of text to consider in a very limited amount of time and still need to keep the process transparent and easy to understand. Like the other co-leads, we found it challenging to navigate this space, and this led to some evolution of the methodology applied in the different sessions of the contact group. We believe that we have overall found our bearing by now. Finally, we wish to express our gratitude for the feedback and methodological proposals received by some parties, which helped to refine our methodology. We also want to thank all delegates for their patience and keeping the good spirit despite the complexities facing us. Thank you, Co-Chair.
Thank you, co-leads. I understand that Georgia is now back with us, so let's hear the report from Georgia on
Hello.
contact group number 2.
Can you hear me now?
Very well. Please go ahead,
Okay.
Tiona.
Sorry, I have some connection problems today.
It's happened to all of us.
Yes. Distinguished delegates, it is my pleasure to address you on behalf of my colleague, Alfred, and myself. The mandate of the Contact Group 2 is to consider targets 1 to 8. The Contact Group met for the first time on Thursday, 26 August, and will invite its second session tomorrow, Wednesday, September 1st. Our intention in the first session had been to address targets 1 to 4 and to take up targets 5 to 8 in the second session. However, such was the richness and depth of our discussion that we were only able to cover targets 1 and 2. During the plenary, there had been general support expressed for target 1. Many parties expressed considerations for its means of implementation and monitoring. Some delegations commented that they would like to make the target more precise, ambitious or inclusive, and aligned with CBD objectives. Accordingly, during the contact group, we heard specific proposals for amendment of the target from 25 parties, and 4 proposals from observers supported by 1 or more party. This added to proposals made in the plenary by 2 parties and 2 major stakeholder groups, IPLCs and youth, supported by parties. Each of the proposed amendments was noted and reflected in composite text, which captures all the proposals against the original text. These are provided in a non-paper we have prepared and published to enable the contact group to take stock of its progress and to guide its second session. The discussion provided several points of rationale for amendment and helped to clarify areas of convergence and divergence. Considering target 2, you will recall that many delegations voiced support in plenary for this separate target on ecosystem restoration, noting its importance to the global biodiversity framework and for the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. Among them, some called for more precision on the sectors to which it applies. Some addressed the quantitative aspect of 20%, and others addressed societal aspects relevant to restoration. Two parties provided text amendments, as did IPLCs, supported by several parties. In the contact group, we heard specific proposals for amendment of the target from 22 parties, from a non-party, and two proposals from observers supported by parties. Each of the proposed amendments was noted and reflected in a composite text which captures all the proposals against the original text. These are also provided in the non-paper. As with Target 1, the discussion provided points of rationale for amendment and helped to clarify areas of convergence and divergence. Distinguished delegates, the idea of inviting emailed proposals of text to some of the contact groups in advance of their work had not emerged before we concluded our first session. Nonetheless, we have received proposals from a few parties by email, and as you will see, have included those in our non-paper. We will work in our second session to invite the proposal of concrete suggestions of textual amendments during the session on the targets we have not yet addressed. As with other groups, in order to advance more rapidly, we shall focus on hearing and compiling proposed amendments, along with their rationale, and will not integrate this into a composite text during the session. Delegates will be invited to place proposals of text in chat box when they take the floor. We will work only on targets 3 to 8 and advance our work as far as we can. Of course, we will also provide further details and guidance when we start our work. Dear co-chairs, distinguished delegates, we look forward to seeing you and to your active contribution tomorrow. And of course, finally, at the last, I would like to thank the Secretariat for their kind support, because without them it would be impossible to do this work. Thank you.
Thank you, Teona Karchava. We'll now turn to group number 5, which, as you know, is under agenda item 5, digital sequence information. The group is being chaired by co-leads Letitia Chiwamulomoni of South Africa and Mr. Goethe Voigt Hansen of Norway. I would like to give the floor to Letitia Chiwamulomoni. Letitia, you have the floor. I can see that South Africa line is open, the microphone and camera are red. Very good, we can see you now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair, and apologies for the delayed connection. On Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday of last week, the contact group on agenda item 5 on digital sequence information on genetic resources met under the co-leadership of Mr. Gaute Vogt Hansen of Norway and myself. The mandate of the contact group was to develop a draft recommendation on how to consider DSI in the context of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. To facilitate discussion in the contact group, we drafted a co-leads paper based on the elements included in the pre-session document as well as textual proposals made during the plenary session. The contact group was well attended, ranging from 350 to 473 participants, including 82 to 95 parties and 81 to 111 observers, depending on the session. We had 173 interventions across the 3 sessions. Generally, all parties, IPLCs, and observers expressed their views and desired text changes very collaboratively and with positive spirit. They acknowledged that this was a productive process that would be useful for the subsequent negotiations in Geneva. In terms of substance, the 3 sessions of the contact group successfully achieved several pre-established steps. Following parties' agreement to the organization of work of the contact group, we collected additional textual proposals for the potential elements of a draft recommendation to the Conference of the Parties, which parties later adjusted as appropriate. We had reflections on areas of convergence through iterative steps of collection of views, validation, and clarification from the participants. This also brought to light potential areas of apparent divergence, indicating potential needs for further work and discussion. We proposed a discussion on possible linkages between DSI and the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, in line with the working group's mandate given in COP Decision 14/20. However, several parties suggested relevant contact groups under Agenda Item 4 will be the place for them to suggest textual changes and exchange views. Parties agreed for us to prepare a co-lead summary of those 2 discussions. Regarding the draft recommendation submitted by the co-leads for the consideration by the working group, the group agreed that proposals for future work should be addressed through the report of the working group instead. And the draft decision for COP will be forwarded to the in-person session in January for further consideration. Following discussions in the contact group on work needed to prepare for the negotiations at the resumed session in January and subsequently at COP, we identified that the following proposals had wide support. Firstly, inviting the submissions of new views on how to address DSI under the Convention and the Nagoya Protocol, based on but not limited to the information and elements contained in document CBD/Working Group 2020/3/4. And secondly, updating the analysis of policy approaches, options, or modalities, and to undertake an assessment of those based on a set of existing criteria with a view to identifying potential advantages and disadvantages of each. We also suggested the establishment of a Friends of the Co-Leads to guide and support the development of the work regarding policy approaches, options, or modalities, with the co-lead submitting their report to the working group prior to its resumed session in Geneva. However, there was no time to specifically discuss this proposal in the contact group. The last session ran late, and the co-lead suggested to establish a Friends of the Co-Leads to refine and discuss paragraph 4C and D of the draft recommendation. However, as many parties had already logged off, this group was not established, and the co-leads decided to simply report today on the outcome of the session in a transparent manner. We are working with the co-chairs and the Bureau on our proposal that a Friends of the Co-Leads be established to support and guide further work related to DSI between now and the resumed session of the working group in Geneva. And we will come back with the conclusion on Friday during the last plenary. We have already received several expressions of interest by parties to join such a group. To conclude, my colleague and I consider that the mandate of the contact group on DSI has been fulfilled. We will make our report available as a co-leads paper in the coming days. We would like to thank the Bureau and the co-chairs who have given us their confidence and trust. Also, we would like to thank the Executive Secretary, the staff of the Secretariat, all the parties and observers who have brought this contact group to a positive conclusion. Thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair.
Thank you, Lactisa Chiwamulomoni, for your excellent report. We will now turn to contact group number 1 on focusing on the goals, milestone, and mission. I understand, and the overall structure, section A to E. I understand they're ready for their reports, and I'll ask Mr. Norbert Berlecher of Switzerland to deliver this report. Norbert, you have the floor.
You co-chairs, dear colleagues, we just rushed over from our contact group to report in this plenary. My co-lead Vinod Mathur and I would like to begin by commending the delegations for their cooperative spirit in advancing the extensive work that was allocated to contact group 1. Due to the added plenary session on Wednesday, 25th August 21, the first session of the contact group was shortened to 2 hours. At our first session on the 25th August, contact group 1 considered goal A and initiated discussions on goal B. The delegations worked interactively and were able to conclude discussions on goal A and developed a preliminary composite text on that goal. And I identified the various inputs from delegations and identified areas for refinement. The first session provided valuable experience to all of us on intricacies of working collaboratively in a virtual form. It was therefore necessary to refine the modalities of the contact group in line with the suggestions from the Bureau for the second session of the contact group, which was convened earlier today. For this second session of the contact group today, we adopted the so-called GRULAC modality of work and continued in a very efficient way. Discussions of goal B continued with goal C, D, the overall structure of the framework, as well as the sections A to E of the draft Global Biodiversity Framework. The new operating modality meant that we were able to make swift progress and completed our discussions on the goals. The contact group then took up the discussions on the structure of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. We heard a diverse range of views on the structure from parties which aim to ensure a cohesive post-2020 global framework that is also easy to communicate. The contact group also initiated discussions on section A to E. While almost all requests for the floor were addressed, there were very few, I guess 2 parties, which were not able to get the chance to make their last intervention before we had to stop and to be ready for the plenary. However, these 2 parties are invited to send in their text proposals to the Secretariat for compilation in the report for the contact group 1. I would like to extend my sincere appreciation of me and my colleague to the Secretariat for their important support, but also to all the active members of the contact group for their spirit of cooperation with us as we worked together on advancing the progress of developing the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. And you can hear I'm still exhausted. We had such a fast pace in our contact group this afternoon, but we achieved really surprising progress. I was sure that we would not be able to cover all, but in our view, we managed it, and we are glad that we have now a clear ideas of text proposals by the parties that we can compile in a report. And this report, of course, will then be made available to all parties and to you, co-chairs. And we are waiting for instruction for future work, intersessional work, or however we will continue to work on these topics. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Norbert. This report is well done, and I know that you've been working very hard with your group. Colleagues, distinguished delegates, contact group 3 has not met, as you know, as yet, and they will do so on Wednesday and Thursday. We'll therefore hear the report back on Friday as part of the final plenary. As you know, contact group 3 is focusing on target 9 to 13, nature contribution to people, also under agenda item 4. This group will be shared by colleagues Ms. Gillian Guthrie of Jamaica and Mr. Andrew Scott of the United Kingdom. Thank you. This completes the report from the contact group, and we should now turn our attention to what we've left off on the 24th of August on agenda item 4. So therefore, I will now give the floor to my co-chair, Francis. Francis, are you able to take this on?
Hello, can you hear me?
Very well, thank you.
Yeah, I'll try, but be on standby just in case the network goes off. It has been on and off, but during just the contact group meeting which we had, it was on perfectly. Now, when we are supposed to start, I see it beginning to fluctuate. So, dear delegates, on Wednesday, August 25th, we opened agenda item 4 on the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. Unfortunately, we were unable to complete the first reading on this item as we ran out of time. We had interventions from regional groups, parties, and other governments, as well as 3 major stakeholder groups. We would like to conclude the item 4 by providing with intervention from representatives of major stakeholder groups that were unable to take the floor on 24th of August, and some observer organizations, time permitting. As we give the floor to observers, we recognize that your statements are from the first reading and that you may have already made useful interventions in the contact group already. However, we wanted to give a chance to those who have not read their original statements to do so. Colleagues, I would like to remind you that we have a very tight schedule, and of course the time is still very limited, just as we started. I now would like to open the floor for interventions by representatives of major stakeholder groups who have not delivered a statement on item 4 so far. Each statement should not exceed 4 minutes. Please do not exceed 4 minutes. When I give you the floor, your microphone will be activated, the status bar will turn red on your computer, and you may start to speak immediately. So with this, I will therefore now like to open the floor for interventions. And I think I see on my floor I see I see CMS. So Secretariat, if you could give the floor to CMS. CMS.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Excellent. Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair. We really appreciate this chance to make these remarks, so thanks for making that possible. We greatly appreciate the hard work of the co-chairs and the CBD Secretariat in delivering this first draft. We do believe it could be further improved, and I understand that good discussions have already been taking place on some of the targets. I will only highlight a few key points, and we have already submitted our full analysis. Most importantly, connectivity, ecological connectivity, must not continue to be a secondary step in the new framework in the area-based approaches. It should be central to planning on which areas to protect and on which areas to restore, not only connecting areas that are selected for those purposes. Migratory species themselves are great indicators for which areas require protection. So when we look at Goal A, which uses the word integrity as the umbrella concept for area, connectivity, and integrity, we are concerned that this does not well reflect the nature of connectivity. Connected habitats can include non-pristine, mixed-use areas and areas long distances apart. Therefore, we suggest that the word be replaced by something more neutral, such as natural functioning. Target 2 omits the need to restore connectivity as part of an area-based approach and only speaks to connecting the ecosystems for which restoration efforts are being made. With respect to species targets, Target 5, as drafted, seems to suggest an intent to increase the current levels of harvesting, trade, and use of wild species, stating an ambition that, and I quote, that harvesting is legal, rather than words such as that any use of wild species must be sustainable, legal, and effectively regulated. Paragraph 18 provides the best opportunity to achieve synergies at the national level. It could call for NBSAPs to include commitments of governments to all biodiversity-related agreements to which they are parties. Finally, we continue to believe that it is essential to include a headline indicator that measures connectivity, such as the conservation status of migratory species. As I said, we've submitted our comments and we are participating in the contact group and greatly appreciate again this opportunity to say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you, CMS. Now I'm going to give the floor to the following. At least you can take the floor if you're not yet there. This is CBD Alliance, and then I'll give to subnational and local governments, followed by World Business Council for Sustainable Development, or it might be International Chamber of Commerce. So I'll now give the floor to CBD Alliance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for this opportunity to present a summary of views of the CBD Alliance members. Virtual negotiations do not allow for equitable participation of the Global South and vulnerable groups, so our contribution does not imply accepting the process or the proposed targets. We have to address the systemic root causes of biodiversity loss in a deeply extractive and inequitable global economy driven by wealthy and powerful elites and corporations. Private and public investments and perverse incentives which promote destructive activities have to be fully regulated, phased out, or otherwise aligned, and we support parties' concrete proposals in this respect. Target 18 should include measures to justly penalize destructive industries, and Target 19 needs to mobilize public funds and disincentivize environmental degradation by addressing how debt, austerity, and tax avoidance worsens it. We express our concerns about proposals to use public funds to leverage private investments, which triggers dependencies of public institutions on private sector interests. The CBD obliges states to prevent the acceleration of the global biodiversity loss by regulating its main drivers, business and overconsumption, particularly in rich states. Targets 15 and 16 should not leave it for business and consumers to self-regulate as they wish. CBD implementation should not adversely affect states' obligations on human rights related to the sustainable use of biodiversity. We support the inclusion of a reference to the right of safe, clean, healthy and sustainable environment and other environmental rights in the text. Rights-based, community-based, gender-sensitive and equitable governance for area conservation and the specific role, rights and tenure of indigenous peoples and local communities and women should be safeguarded in targets 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 9, 10, 20 and 21. And we support the different concrete proposals in this respect. Target 21 must explicitly secure the rights of IPLCs and women. Women and girls have to be empowered through transformative, gender-just biodiversity conservation and meaningful participation in its decision-making. The draft gender plan of action should be reflected in a self-standing gender target that is proposed by the Women's Caucus and supported by several parties. The utilitarian and monetarist approach in the goals and targets separating people from nature must be removed, and we support party recommendations in this respect. CBD does not have the time or resources to be confronted with extreme, new or insecure emerging technologies one by one, after they have been released into the environment in the absence of transparent regulatory frameworks. Participatory technology horizon scanning, assessment and monitoring has to be ensured in a new mechanism that addresses precaution, free prior and informed consent, liability and redress, and respect for human rights and knowledge systems of IPLCs and women. Biodiversity loss cannot be recovered in full, as extinct is forever. Terms like net improvement and net gain should just be avoided, including in the milestones. And lastly, the totality of CBD obligations, the Rio principles, the precautionary principle, polluter liability, intergenerational rights and intrinsic value of biodiversity should be respected. We thank the parties who have supported our proposals so far and welcome more party support for these and other proposals. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, CBD Alliance. I now give the floor to subnational and local governments. Secretariat. Representative of, yes, I think you have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Co-président.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. It is a pleasure to represent here today the Advisory Committee on Subnational Governments, coordinated by Regions 4 and the Government of Quebec, ICLE, the group of leading subnational governments towards the Aichi biodiversity targets, the European Committee of the Regions, and all of the Edinburgh process partners. We, local and subnational governments, will focus our intervention on three key elements. First, we welcome the first draft of the Global Biodiversity Framework, particularly the recognition of the whole of government approach. I'm sorry, the sound has been lost. The interpreter has no more sound coming in.
John, so maybe you have to.
Okay.
Yeah, now
Sorry.
we can hear you. Okay.
Okay. So, sorry for that. Donc, pour bien garantir que le rôle.
So, this recognizes that the contribution of all the levels of government are taken into account and implemented in the framework, particularly in the implementation section. So we would be happy to provide our suggestions in writing. We would also like to add a definition of the whole of government approach to the glossary in order to ensure that there's harmonization between local, subnational, and national governments, while at the same time ensuring harmony between the English and French versions, that they be in agreement. Secondly, we reiterate the need to add an explicit reference to the One Health approach. The connections between biodiversity health and the risk of future pandemics should be reflected in the global framework, as suggested in the Edinburgh Declaration. At the same time, the inclusion of all levels of subnational government in the development and implementation of recovery measures related to the ongoing pandemic will ensure that the pandemic response contributes to conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. Thirdly, we welcome Goal B of the framework, which addresses nature's contributions to people. However, we would appreciate the addition of a reference to the potential of biodiversity to provide solutions to urban and regional challenges, notably via green and blue spaces. In this respect, we take note of the removal of the reference to nature-based solutions, and we suggest that it be put back in the text. We do not want to get into semantics and a debate on them. We understand that nature-based solutions are complex, but if they are well-defined and used appropriately, they could bring on tangible and transformative changes for nature at the local and subnational levels. I conclude by thanking you for taking these suggestions into consideration and by reconfirming our availability to provide additional information as well as our support to the parties in finalizing a global framework that will allow us to live in harmony with nature. I would like to thank the UK and the other parties that recognize the importance of the whole of government approach in their statements. Thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair.
Thank you, subnational government. Thank you, representative of subnational government, for making that statement. We'll now invite representative of the business. If you are there, this is the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. Then from there, we shall open the floor to observer organization. So do we have, give the floor to business.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. I am making this statement on behalf of the Business for Nature Coalition. Business for Nature welcomes the discussions over last week and would like to highlight three key elements to be more strongly reflected on the framework. First, set a simple and clear mission that will resonate beyond the CBD community and drive action, including by business. The mission must be a 1.5 degrees equivalent for nature. This is essential to reflect the urgency and clarity needed around the biodiversity agenda. The current mission is confusing and unclear, so we are suggesting a mission to halt and reverse biodiversity loss by 2030. Second, we welcome targets 14, 15, and 16 that recognize the need to embed the value of nature into all decision-making. Target 15 must be strengthened to ensure government support and require businesses and financial institutions to measure, disclose, and report on their dependencies and impacts on nature. Third, Target 18 must be strengthened to commit parties to eliminate and redirect all harmful subsidies. This is essential to change the rules of the game and create a level playing field for businesses to operate and stop incentivizing on overexploitation of natural resources. Mr. Co-Chair, we are aware of the limited time available, yet we must ensure the framework is inclusive and implementable for all. We therefore would like to request the Secretariat to consider alternative ways for observers to be able to still contribute to the discussions, for example, by proposing text suggestions in the chat so that parties can support them. All of our text suggestions have been submitted to parties and we remain available for further discussions. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair.
Thank you. Minister of Business. Dear delegates, we'll now go to hear, before we bring on more or hear more statements from observer organizations, we will hear a short video from IUCN, and I hope Secretariat, I don't know whether you're ready for it to be played.
Chair, distinguished delegates and colleagues. Biodiversity is in trouble, and it is resulting in loss of life and livelihood worldwide. We know that if we take bold and urgent action now, it is not too late to halt and reverse this trend. From IUCN perspective, the post-2020 framework must set out ambitious goals and targets for parties, other governments, and all stakeholders to halt the loss of biodiversity by 2030 and to achieve recovery and restoration by 2050. The framework must galvanize, first, protection of 30% of the planet by 2030 in the right places, key biodiversity areas, effectively managed and equitably governed. The IUCN Green List of protected and conserved areas can support the journey towards this ambitious target. Secondly, significant scaling up of species conservation to prevent extinctions, improve the status of wild species, and ensure that their use is safe, legal, and sustainable. We offer help through the developing of the Global Species Action Plan. Thirdly, ramping up all restoration of degraded ecosystem globally through the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration. And fourthly, on the critical issue of resources, the allocation of 0.7 up to 1% of global GDP to fund implementation of the framework to increase investment in nature from all sources. Part of this is the integration of nature into economic policies through redirection of subsidies that are harmful to nature by at least $500 billion per year. Finally, the line of sight of the framework should be strengthened. Each national target must add up to the relevant global target to make national level contributions transparent and measurable. Regular biodiversity stock takes will be needed to enhance ambition, resources, and implementation. I look forward to interact with many of you at the coming IUCN World Conservation Congress, where we will continue the discussion. Thank you, and I wish you all a very productive meeting.
With that video, dear delegates, I will now give the floor to GB, followed by BirdLife. GB?
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. I'm addressing Target 20 in the first draft of the framework. GBIF feels that as currently worded, Target 20 misses some of the key tools and solutions critical to implementation of the framework, namely the establishment and improvement of systems to monitor and observe key components of biodiversity and to make comprehensive data freely accessible for application in research and decision making. We're sure that the importance of these tools is understood by parties and appreciated by drafters of the framework, especially as they're well reflected in the draft knowledge management component and the suite of indicators proposed to monitor this target. However, the present wording places reference to enabling monitoring rather awkwardly as an apparent consequence of meeting the target rather than an operative part of the target itself. The placing of reference to traditional knowledge as a sub-clause in the first part of the target also reduces the clarity of what we see as the key objective, namely that knowledge and evidence of all types guides decision-making and, by implication, enables implementation of the whole framework. We've proposed rewording of the target, which we feel better expresses its intent and which we've provided in writing, and we're grateful that this is already captured in the non-paper prepared by the co-leads for Contact Group 4 for discussion on Thursday. Thank you very much for your time, Mr. Co-Chair.
Thank you, GBIF. I now give the floor to BiodiVerity, followed by WCS.
Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of a group of 7 observers. Nature is in crisis, placing human and planetary health at risk. In answer to increasing calls for the right to a healthy environment, Open-Ended Working Group 3 must signal a turning point, increasing urgency and political attention for nature, and launching important intersessional work on outstanding topics. We welcome Draft 1. We stress that measurable 2030 milestones or outcomes are critical to assess whether the 2030 action targets are leading us towards the 2030 goals. However, gaps remain, in particular regarding the just transformation of the sectors driving biodiversity loss and fueling our unsustainable environmental footprint, including our agriculture and food systems, and on integrating the rights-based approach. We highlight 4 specific concerns. First, the 2030 mission must be made more ambitious by explicitly seeking a nature-positive world where biodiversity loss is reversed this decade. We're particularly concerned about footnote 8, which could imply, incorrectly, that stabilising a rate of loss by 2030 is sufficient. Second, we appreciate quantification of targets 18 and 19, but stress that the figures presented are conservative estimates, that all harmful incentives must be eliminated or repurposed, that any positive financial flows must be additional to current flows, and that the framework must specifically require the financial sector to align all public and private flows with the goals of the framework. Third, the draft text on responsibility and transparency needs to be significantly strengthened to ensure that the implementation mechanism is anchored as a critical and inseparable component of the framework and agreed at COP15. Section J must provide more details on the components of a strengthened implementation mechanism, including planning, reporting, monitoring, reviewing, and ratcheting. And fourth, the draft is basically silent in the context of COVID-19 on the issue of pandemic prevention at source. The framework must include all elements required to help prevent future epidemics and pandemics of zoonotic origin, including wildlife use, trade and markets, and other causes and drivers of pathogenic spillovers. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, BiodiVerity International. I will now give the floor to WCS, followed by AFWA, New Win, and UN Women, along as listed there. Co-chair, be on standby. My network is proving a bit shaky. So, WCS, the floor is over to you.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank
yes,
you, and
I can.
I hope your network holds, sir. This statement is on behalf of 7 NGOs, and I will put the names in the chat later. We believe that critical changes are required to achieve sufficient ambition in the GBF and to ensure alignment with recent political commitments, including those we were pleased to hear yesterday in the pre-COP high-level event hosted by Colombia. The GBF must have a level of ambition commensurate with the seriousness of this current biodiversity crisis. We have 3 points, but the first, we agree with the intervention from BirdLife, so we will just say that we want the mission to call for a nature-positive approach that reverses biodiversity loss. Second, we recommend that parties draw more attention to important and vulnerable ecosystems. Coral reefs face a dire outlook under current climate projections, yet they're losing the attention of Aichi Target 10. Tropical forests provide habitat for numerous species and are a key nature-based solution to climate change, yet receive no specific attention as they did under Aichi 5. We urge you to draw attention to such ecosystems through changes to the goals, targets, and monitoring framework. Third and final, though we have other points in our written submissions, the framework must encourage significant changes to business as usual to prevent the next pandemic of zoonotic origin. This requires actions to make changes to wildlife exploitation, trade, and consumption policies that threaten our planet's remaining intact ecosystems and human and animal health. Target 5 is the only place in the framework that even remotely addresses this issue and must be strengthened. The draft is shockingly silent on the pandemic, we are all experiencing and must address how to work to prevent the next global pandemic at source in terms of both habitat destruction and wildlife exploitation and trade, particularly for human consumption. We will share specifics on Target 5 in the contact group tomorrow. Thank you very much for your attention and the opportunity to intervene.
Thank you, WCS. I will now give the floor to Afua. NGO Afua, you have the floor.
Hi, thank you, Co-Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to address the plenary today. The Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies is the voice of fish and wildlife agencies in the US and Canada. We appreciate the improved incorporation of the second objective of the convention into the first draft, such as in Target 5, and the acknowledgement of the importance of biodiversity to people's livelihoods and lifestyles. In the US and Canada, subnational governments are our member organizations, and they have mandates to manage and conserve biodiversity. It is critical that national and subnational governments are working together to implement and step down the framework. We believe that the framework could better highlight the important role of subnational governments in this regard and have recommendations in where we can incorporate that better through the purpose and other spots within the first draft. Regarding Target 3, the association supports the wording changes in the first draft to emphasize conservation of lands and not just protection. Both are critical to support biodiversity conservation. Our agencies work with many landowners and on different types of land, and would like to see some key principles to achieve this target be incorporated into the one-pagers that we will share. Target 5, although we fully support the intent of this target and its attempt to incorporate a One Health approach, we have concerns about the word safe being ambiguous and hard to interpret and implement. We will share some specific language with contact groups in ways that we believe we could include a One Health approach into the target and replace the word safe to be more effective and also support not only reducing the risk of future pandemics, but supporting legal and sustainable use and livelihoods. Thank you for the opportunity to comment today.
Thank you. I will note that the comments from CBD Alliance, CMS, and IUCN receive support from parties. And now we'll give the floor to UN Women. UN Women, you have the floor.
Hello?
We can hear you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chair, for this opportunity to share UN Women's views on the draft Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. UN Women appreciates the incorporation of gender perspectives in the current draft, including in the theory of change and in the enabling conditions. We note, however, that achieving gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls is not adequately captured in this draft of the GBF. It is regrettable that the previous zero drafts Target 22, a dedicated target to promote gender equality and women's and girls' roles and rights in biodiversity conservation and its sustainable use, was deleted in this first draft of GBF. If the post-2020 GBF is to be truly aligned with the SDGs and related MEAs, including the Rio Conventions, UN Women asserts the need to add to this first draft a Target 22 similar to what was in the zero draft of the GBF, as follows. Ensure equal access and rights to, as well as benefits from conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity for women and girls, as well as their effective participation in decision-making processes related to biodiversity. This proposal aligns with the proposal already made by the Women Major Group, which was supported by a number of parties, and which was also made in the just recently read statement by the CBD Alliance. Furthermore, We also support CBD Alliance's proposal for a rights-based, community-based, and equitable governance for area conservation and the specific role, rights, and tenure of IPLCs and women to be safeguarded in targets 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 9, 10, 20, and 21. UNEP, UN Women and UNEP WCMC have already identified a number of developed SDG indicators that could be used to monitor progress towards this proposed target 22. And these are identified and focus on securing land tenure rights and linked to access to resources and related benefits. The specifics are in the statement that we already submitted, co-chairs, and just one last point to mention that on the headline indicators in this first draft of the GBF, UN Women notes that there are several more headline indicators that could be disaggregated by sex and should be incorporated in this draft GBF. Thank you for this opportunity to provide our comments, Chair.
Thank you, UN Women. I will now go to UN CITES, followed by Traffic. CITES, you have the floor.
Distinguished colleagues, CITES and its parties welcome the first draft of the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, which has been produced in challenging circumstances. We believe that it forms an excellent platform for further detailed negotiations. We would like to stress the vital role of the biodiversity-related conventions in this process. The biodiversity-related conventions can contribute to and draw strength from the framework, both in its elaboration and in its implementation. We therefore strongly endorse this linkage made in paragraphs 2, 8, 16, and 19 of the first draft of the framework. Standing at the crossroads between trade, development, and the environment, CITES and its parties are fully ready to engage in this process. Given the CITES mandate, we recommend greater emphasis on one point: sustainable, well-regulated, and legal use of wild species can be a driver for biodiversity conservation, as well as providing benefits for people and supporting their livelihoods. We particularly welcome Target 5 on the harvesting, trade, and use of wild species, which is extremely relevant to the CITES mandate. We think, however, that the wording could be adjusted to provide greater clarity, and we will make some detailed suggestions in the relevant contact group. Chair, thank you for allowing us to make this brief intervention, and allow me to assure you again of the continued support for your efforts from CITES and its parties. Thank you.
Thank you, CITES. I'll now turn to Traffic, followed by Imperial College, and then New Wind, and I will close the floor to move to the next agenda item. So, Traffic, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Traffic, the Wildlife Trade Network, is very encouraged to see that the first draft continues to address the issue of harvesting, trade, and use of wild species in Target 5, and the continued emphasis on sustainable trade and use of wild species and its benefits to people in Target 9. We look forward to further discussions on these targets and hope they can take into consideration harvesting, trade, and use of all species of fauna, flora, and fungi, as well as the equal attention needed to both reduce illegal and sustainable trade and to promote sustainable practices to reduce the threat across all wild species and commodities. The current COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the intimate link between human, animal, and environmental health. And it's very encouraging to see the reference to use being safe to human health in Target 5, as well as in various other targets. We hope discussions in coming days give further thought to the ambition and coherence in the framework around the commitments on this nexus of health and biodiversity and the implementation of the One Health approach, including through the priorities and milestones identified in the draft Global Action Plan for Biodiversity and Health. Finally, Traffic also notes that the framework also continues to address the critical issue of unsustainable consumption in Target 16. While it can be argued that the current wording on making responsible choices can be interpreted to include avoiding unsustainable consumption, the current text of the target does appear to focus only on waste and overconsumption of food and materials. And we hope there is further discussion on the need for reducing unsustainable consumption of many other forms of wildlife resources that may not be regarded as materials. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you for respecting the time and for speaking slowly. I know our interpreters are having a tough time. Imperial College, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I speak on behalf of Western Michigan University, Imperial College, Island Conservation, Alliance for Science, Cornell University, Advanced Conservation Strategies, the Institute on Ethics and Policy for Innovation at McMaster University, PRI.
I think there is some technical problems with Imperial. Let's wait a second. You're back.
Thank you. I don't know where we stop. Furthermore, the biodiversity targets set by this convention have not been met. The new framework offers a unique opportunity to reset our ambition and shape actions for the coming decades. We need to implement approaches and solutions that will be sufficiently game-changing. The framework should underline that science is crucial for identifying environmental challenges as well as formulating solutions. Existing tools and methods are not enough to save nearly 1 million species that are currently threatened with extinction. Capacity building and technical cooperation are vital, but we need more than transferring current knowledge. The framework should reaffirm the need to create a supportive environment for scientific research and innovation, recognizing the need for novel technologies, such as biotechnologies, to complement existing ones. Target 6 assumes that current tools will solve the issue, and we know they cannot. The new approaches are crucial to provide solutions to the threats of alien invasive species. Target 17 should also include reference to the anticipated benefits of biotechnology, as highlighted by the UK and Brazil in their recent contribution, because as recognized in Article 16 of this convention, biotechnologies are an essential to the 3 objectives of the CBD. Innovation and scientific research should be clearly reflected on targets and goals to help secure adequate funding for these activities. The cost of delaying solution is high. Embracing innovation as a key strategy opens new opportunities to find solutions that we need to address the current environmental and health crisis. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I will note that BirdLife, WCS, AFWA, CITES, and UN Women receive support through the chat. I will now turn to New Wind Association, and the very last will be the Missionary Society that would close the framework. So, New Wind, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Okay, thank you. It has been clearly identified that acceleration of global biodiversity loss is crucially and most forcefully driven by the overconsumption and privileged commercial rights of world's rich states, elites and corporations. While the CBD obliges states to regulate these overconsumption processes and business activities to prevent them from accelerating the global biodiversity loss, the GBF, however, fully neglects these states' obligations to regulate. Instead, the GBF, on the contrary, further authorizes the corporations and rich consumers to assess and choose themselves narratives which would publicly validate and justify how sustainable such state businesses and overconsumption would be, without being by any regulation bound to be prevented from further accelerating global biodiversity loss. But now GBF ensures that the global biodiversity loss will continue to further accelerate as driven by these rich states and commercial
Please,
elites.
you went. If you could get close to your microphone, the interpreters are having trouble picking your voice.
Okay. So the GPF also, at the same time, when it ensures that this kind of overconsumption and commercial rights can continue, at the same time, it undermines people's rights to use the areas where they live freely in ways which are sustainable and equal. World's biodiversity is proven being conserved best in areas held and used by indigenous and other such peoples who live by their own local means of subsistence as far as they can determine their lives themselves by their communities' locally adapted subsistence life practices. Rights of sustainable use have to be made stronger than commercial rights over the areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Nguyen. I'll now pass the floor for the last intervention. Missionary Society of St. Joseph, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Very well.
Thank you very much. Thank you, co-chair, delegates, and my fellow observers for the opportunity to offer an intervention at this meeting. I represent the Missionary Society of St. Columban, a Catholic religious order that works alongside some of the world's most vulnerable populations to climate change and biodiversity loss, including indigenous communities, women, and children in countries including Chile, Peru, the Philippines, Myanmar, Taiwan, Fiji, and Pakistan. We join with parties, other NGOs, and faith-based organizations calling for a more ambitious, transformative, and Earth cosmic-centered vision. We thank you for the work that has been done to date. We have submitted in writing recommendations regarding targets 3, 8, 14, 15, and 21. In addition, we would like to make recommendations regarding matters that are not currently included in the GBF. We recommend adding a target that recognizes the reality that certain industries, like the fossil fuel industry, can never be managed sustainably in alignment with international biodiversity conservation goals and should be ended. This proposed target should commit to providing financial and educational support that makes it possible for workers and communities who rely on these industries to transition to more sustainable ones. We recommend that the framework add a target that seeks to minimize the impact of military infrastructure on biodiversity, particularly sensitive and landmark ecosystems. Every year, governments spend billions of dollars on the research, development, and implementation of more deadly and sophisticated ways of killing people and destroying the environment. The global community must recognize that this is a significant cause of habitat destruction in the world.
Please conclude.
Thank you. We had one final recommendation with regards to climate change and ecosystem degradation. But finally, just to say that we stand ready as a Catholic organization to offer necessary educational and community ongoing
Please conclude.
Organizing initiatives to build support for this framework's implementation. Thank you once again.
Thank you. I'll ask delegates to respect the time. This is a matter of respect for everybody. We will now go for a break of 15 minutes, and we'll see you back at 40 minutes past the hour. So 40 minutes past the hour. Thank you very much. Keep the line open, and we'll be back there. Thank you. Can my camera be activated? Secretary, I think you can hear me, but I'm not sure you can see me.
We can hear you but can't see you. Maybe you have
Okay,
to reactivate your camera on the device settings.
I'm trying to do so. It's not working. All right, this should be working now. Excellent. Thank you. And before we do anything else and switch to the other agenda item, I want to mention that GBIF and Imperial College statement were supported. Secretariat, is there anything else we need to say? Okay, thank you. Distinguished delegates, we would now like to turn our attention to draft element of a possible decision operationalizing the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. The pre-session document for this meeting contained draft elements of a possible decision operationalizing the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Frameworks, Appendix to CBD Working Group 2023-3. While an earlier version was presented at the first meeting of the working group alongside the Euro draft, the working group has not had yet reviewed the draft. Accordingly, we would like to provide parties and observers with an opportunity to provide their views on the draft decision of the plenary session. We would remind delegates that the draft decision refers to draft decisions all to finalize their recommendation for draft decision at their resumed session. It is expected that the working group will also wish to review this draft decision at its resumed session, which is expected to be held concurrently with those of the subsidiary bodies in person for January 2022. With this introduction, we would like to open the floor on the draft decision, and we'll see who we have on the list. The floor is open. Let's see if there is a regional statement first. I see the Democratic Republic of Congo. République démocratique du Congo, vous avez la parole. Ah, je pense que maintenant, nous allons pouvoir vous entendre.
I think we can hear you now. Thank you very much, Mr. To the co-chairs. The Democratic Republic of the Congo is making this statement on behalf of the African region. Mr. Co-chair, Africa recognizes and appreciates the efforts made by the parties to achieve the necessary progress during this OEWG 3 session, the Open-Ended Working Group 3. session. But we are also of the opinion that more work must be done to finalize the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Therefore, our priority is to reach agreement on the content of this framework and on the associated implementation mechanisms. And that is our priority. We thus consider it premature and inappropriate to open any discussion of the draft COP decision on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework at this juncture. All requests for points of view on this subject could compromise and prejudice the outcome of our discussions on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework as a whole. Consequently, we propose that the discussion of the draft decision be suspended and that it be postponed until the framework development process is finalized. For the moment, we could keep the draft decision in square brackets pending its subsequent review. Thank you very much to the co-chairs.
Floor to Germany, who shall indicate whether they are speaking on behalf of a region or as a state. Germany, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I speak on the behalf of the EU and its member states. The EU and its member states thank the co-chairs for this draft decision, which will be important to provide guidance to the parties on the implementation of the GBF. The preliminary draft provides the opportunity for first reflection among parties on the kind of aspects of the GBF that may need to be dealt with an accompanying COP decision. Several of the elements in the draft are, however, subject to ongoing negotiations under SBI 3, Substat 24, as well as Open-Ended Working Group 3 itself, as you, Mr. Co-Chair, and also the African colleague has raised already. A discussion of this draft decision now, in parallel to the ongoing discussions in those fora, risks duplicating or preempting those negotiations. Therefore, the EU and its member states believe it is premature to address this decision in detail during the open-ended working group, given that it will have to be revised in the light of the outcomes of those meetings, and that only COP15 will be in a position to integrate those outcomes of the Open-Ended Working Group 3, Substat 24, and SBI 3 that are relevant for the implementation of the GBF. For that reason, EU and its member states will refrain from submitting concrete text proposals or engaging in textual negotiations of the draft decision right now. We stand ready to share some preliminary views, but given the shortness of the time at this session, we would step back from delivering it here today. But the EU and its member states want to reiterate their willingness to contribute to the future discussions on this draft decision at the appropriate moment during COP15. Thank you.
Thank you, European Union. And yes, you're totally in line with the scenario note in terms where the detailed discussion will take place when we meet face to face. I will now give the floor to Norway. Norway, you have the floor.
Thank you, co-chair. Norway think that there is really no point in discussing the appendix at this point in time. very much as the EU and Africa also noted, because the content of it depends on the content of the framework itself. Because of this, we regard the text as more of a placeholder than an actual text. However, if we are to discuss the text, we have the following 3 points. In the chapo, where we recall the conclusions of the 5th edition of the GBO and so on, we should also make reference to the temperature goals in the Paris Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goals. Para 3 needs to reflect that the implementation mechanism is to be a part of the Global Biodiversity Framework itself and not an element outside of the Global Biodiversity Framework. And my third and last point is that on Para 6, it has incorporated text from Article 20, number 4. If we are to have text from the convention in the appendix, in this case Article 20, we should reflect the whole text of Article 20 and not just part of it. Thank you, Co-Chair.
Thank you, Norway, and I assume you're speaking on your own, for your own and not for JUSCANS.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now the floor is open to parties, and I see on my list Switzerland, followed by Colombia. Switzerland, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And as you indicate, and speaking on behalf of Switzerland, let me first briefly respond to the intervention of Congo and Germany. And let me also say that we do not fully share their approach. We think time is running, and we need to make the best of the time. We need to advance our work, and therefore we think it is also important to collect first views on that draft decision, knowing, of course, that further discussion will take place, and also knowing, as you have also highlighted, that the detailed discussion will then take place when we meet physically again. But we think we should now also use this opportunity to share with each other our concerns, our wishes, our proposals that will help each of us to be much better prepared for the next time when we meet again, and when we can discuss that also after the SPs have had opportunities to address this decision. It is an important decision. It goes together with the Global Biodiversity Framework.
Switzerland, please, is there a way you can use a microphone? It's difficult for the interpreters to pick your voice.
I try to speak a little bit slower. Is it better like that?
It always helps. Please go ahead.
Good. I try to do my best. And I will just, on substance, first of all, we can support the proposals by Norway. We are handing in concrete proposals on that draft decision. I would like to highlight just 2 areas. First, with regards to synergies, we welcome the proposed decision in principle, but we think, and we welcome the reference to the other biodiversity-related conventions, but we think that part on cooperation should be expanded, and we will hand in some concrete proposals on that. Similarly, on finance, Switzerland fully recognizes the important role of the financial resource in that technology, but we also have very concrete wording proposals in that in order to make sure that we agree on something that is effective and workable and that will really make a difference on the ground. In a nutshell, Switzerland is handing in some proposals along these lines, and we think it is important that others share their views as well, and therefore we look really forward to comments by others. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Switzerland. We appreciate and encourage parties to give us their preliminary views, noting that there will be the full discussion will take place in Geneva. So I will now give the floor to Colombia, followed by the United Kingdom. Colombia, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Co-Chair. Colombia,
thanks the co-chairs and the co-leads and the secretariat for their efforts in organisation of the work so we can have a successful third meeting of the OEWG. However, we think that we need to become acquainted with working papers sufficiently in advance, as well as the modalities and organisation of the contact groups and the expected outcome from these sessions so that parties can prepare ourselves, have substantive discussions, and then be able to obtain better and more specific outcomes. Above all else, it's important to have the glossary and an updated version of Addendum 2 of Substa 24 so that we can have a clear idea of the science and rationale behind each target and each concept. Colombia is convinced that we need to make progress in negotiations of the framework and not continue to delay the process. Therefore, we do acknowledge the efforts made by the co-chairs. In this respect, we recommend that we should have more information be made aware of the agenda, the logistics, and the expected outcomes from the different scenarios that have been announced, such as also having a second round of discussions of the open-ended working group 3 in November and in-person sessions in January that the Swiss government has kindly offered to host. Thank you very much for your generosity. Likewise, we also have to finalise the subsidiary bodies sessions who have the mandate to provide key inputs for negotiations that have to make progress in the OEWG. For example, inputs on the monitoring framework, at least in terms of headline indicators, and a proposal for the implementation framework, resource mobilisation, capacity building, and technical and scientific cooperation, amongst others. We hope that the Bureau will be able to take a decision soon on these subjects. Finally, turning to the draft COP decision, we have some preliminary comments that we will send in writing. However, we do consider that we're at a very preliminary stage where there have not been negotiations nor discussions on all of the proposed targets nor other key elements for the framework, such as means of implementation, nor other complementary elements such as the monitoring framework and glossary. So it's important to have a comprehensive discussion in all sections of the framework so that we can take a decision on its content. Also, we need to review whether it would be relevant to assess the framework implementation time, given that this would have a direct impact on what will actually be agreed. Thank you very much, Co-Chair.
Thank you, Colombia, for respecting the time. I will now give the floor to United Kingdom, followed by Mexico. United Kingdom, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. The UK would like to thank the Secretariat for sharing the draft decision that will cover the adoption of the Global Biodiversity Framework at COP15 next year. As you explained, Mr. Co-Chair, the draft of the decision will need to evolve as the work of Substa, SBI and the working group continues over the coming months. But like Switzerland, the UK does think there is value in sharing initial thoughts on the draft at this time. And the UK would like to provide a few general comments for consideration in future versions of the draft. First, while we support the draft text in the preambular paragraphs, we think that in its current form, it does not reflect the full urgency of the need to make transformative change to halt and reverse biodiversity loss. We will suggest amendments, therefore, to the last preambular paragraph to strengthen it. Second, while we support the adoption of the framework in paragraph 1, it is critical that the decision also refers to the measures that are being developed to support its implementation. With this in mind, paragraph 2 will need to be amended to allow for the monitoring framework to be adopted and not just noted. And paragraph 3 will need to be updated following the next sessions of Substa and SBI to accurately reflect the recommendations that they will be making to COP in numerous decisions and to reflect on how they should be implemented in a mutually supportive manner. Third, and finally, on possible future work, we are concerned by the addition of paragraph 5, which could suggest that implementation activities could be delayed until COP16 or such time as other mechanisms are in place. This would represent an unfortunate loss of time when urgent action is needed. Perhaps this could be picked up in paragraphs 14b and c, which set out requests to the Executive Secretary to provide options to enhance implementation and to produce guidance. The UK believes that parties should give the Secretariat a clearer steer of what mechanisms or guidance are required. We will submit our comments in writing. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair.
Thank you, United Kingdom. I will now give the floor to Mexico, followed by Brazil. Mexico, tiene la palabra.
Gracias. Of the floor. Thank you, Co-Chair. With reference to draft elements of a possible decision, Mexico has some suggestions to make. Firstly, full implementation of the post-2020 framework will only be achieved if there is a significant reduction in the threats to biodiversity loss through various means of implementation. As well as an increase in financing from all sources, conditions and regulations must be created that enable and facilitate the provision of benefits for people and the planet. Secondly, we believe that reference must be made to the 8 transitions established in the Global Biodiversity Outlook 5, developed on the basis of information that identified biodiversity loss and lessons learned. 3. It is essential to consider and include Indigenous people and local communities' proposals derived from the 3rd thematic dialogue. 4. It is also time to optimize efforts through a strategy that improves the coordination and cooperation between the 3 Rio Conventions, the Sustainable Development Goals, and the biodiversity-related fora. 5. We believe that it would be relevant to also include other recommendations related to the post-2020 GBF that we will send to the Secretariat, including the long-term strategic approach for mainstreaming of biodiversity, the knowledge management component, proposals to strengthen scientific and technical cooperation, and action plans for both biodiversity and health, as well as the post-2020 Gender Action Plan. Additionally, Mexico also wishes to express its desire to make progress on negotiations during this OEWG3 session and to suggest that if it turns out to be necessary that we could consider holding additional virtual sessions, provided that there is a clear understanding of the outcomes that would have to be achieved, and also that this would serve as a basis for in-person meetings to be held next year. We wish to thank the Government of Switzerland for its generous offer to host certain sessions in January 2022, and we are eagerly awaiting more details, especially as regards planning aspects that will have to be considered in light of the current COVID-19 pandemic context. Finally, Mexico wishes to call the parties' attention to the proposed time period for implementation of the post-2020 framework. At the start of the negotiations, we'd counted on having 10 years to implement this instrument. Time has gone by, and now we're left with scarcely 8.5 years. So we very much urge parties to analyse this fact and establish realistic action without diminishing the requisite ambition in our framework to halt the loss and degradation of biodiversity and enable its recovery, which will without a doubt be of benefit to everyone. Thank you, Co-Chair.
Gracias, Mexico.
Thank you so much, Mexico.
I'm very pleased to pass the leadership back to my co-chair. Francis, do you want to take over?
Thank you, Co-Chair. I hope you can hear me.
Very well, thank you.
Can you hear me? Yes, yeah. So basically using a smaller gadget now. In case there's a problem, let me know. Indeed, time has gone, as we've just heard, and I think we need to really put our heads together to have this framework as soon as possible. So on the screen, my screen here now have Australia, it will be followed by Argentina. Australia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Australia would like to thank the co-chairs for sharing the draft COP decision. Like the EU and its member states, the Africa Group and a number of parties, Australia notes that there is considerable further work that needs to be undertaken through continued sessions of OEWG 3, Substa 24 and SBI 3 before parties will be in a position to negotiate that decision. Nonetheless, we offer these preliminary views. We would like to question why the long-term approach to mainstreaming biodiversity isn't included in the list of key documents in paragraph 3, noting it is the key mechanism to support implementation of mainstreaming elements within the framework. We would also like to support Norway's point in relation to the final phrase of paragraph 6, which is text from Article 20, subpara 4. This overemphasises one element of Article 20 without balancing it with the other related elements of Article 20. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll now give the floor to Brazil, followed by Russian Federation. Brazil.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Nice to see you. Brazil would like to express its appreciation to the efforts and hard work of the co-chairs of the working group and all the co-leads of the contact groups during the last days. We take this opportunity to present some preliminary comments to the proposed draft decision that is expected to adopt the post-2020 GBF. The first draft of the GBF has introduced several ambitious quantitative elements within the goals and targets. While those elements are of fundamental importance to achieve a measurable framework, we must bear in mind the special situation and needs of developing countries and the different contributions to global environmental degradation. In addition, we should not disregard that the lack of adequate financial resources, capacity building, and technology transfer has been the major obstacle for the implementation of the Convention in those countries. Such a challenge has been aggravated by the economic crisis brought by the COVID-19 pandemic, thus emphasizing the essential role of the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, which should be clearly reflected in the COP decision as a cornerstone principle of international environmental law. We should equally recognize the need to achieve the implementation of the three pillars of the Convention in a balanced manner as a precondition to a successful GBF. Given the crucial importance of means of implementation to enable an ambitious, realistic, and balanced framework, Brazil understands that elements related to financial resources, capacity building, technology transfer, and scientific and technical cooperation should be fully integrated in the COP decision. In this regard, Brazil believes two major amendments are needed. First, the COP decision adopting the GBF must establish a global fund for biodiversity to enable the implementation of current Target 19 under the provisions of Article 20 and Article 21 of CBD. Second, the COP decision should also recognize the importance of achieving the full implementation of the Convention and its protocols, including Article 10 of the Nagoya Protocol on the Global Benefit Sharing Mechanism. As many elements of the COP decision are still pending on the conclusion of work of SBI, SUBSTA, and the open-ended working group, we will submit our written proposals at a later stage, and we hope to engage in constructive discussions to achieve a balanced COP decision to adopt the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair.
Thank you, Brazil. Now the floor is given to the Russian Federation.
Уважаемые господа, сопредседатели...
Gentlemen, co-chairs of the working group, we thank you and the Secretariat for the draft decision, which will formalize the framework. In our opinion, the text will be very important and could and should help us to reduce certain elements that we had proposed putting into the framework. Above all, we are talking about the general considerations, the goals, the targets. This was brought up by a number of delegations. These provisions are part of the principles for implementing all of the global framework. And so this includes IPLCs, participation, and others that are in paragraph 9. The preamble as well has to be concise and clear as to the fact that the GBF will make a direct contribution to sustainable development and has been brought up by many delegates. It is extremely important to achieve the 2050 vision, and that is to be done through mainstreaming of biodiversity in the decision-making process and in the plans and action programs, as in Article 14. And in Article 3, there should be an addition of a decision to adopt the implementation mechanism in order to take into account biodiversity based on the OEWG 3 and that of the SBI and SBSTA. Also, there should be a regular review of the program, of the framework, and this should include key avenues of science and technical consultations, as well as providing for the foundation of the framework as it has been, as it will be finalized. And so the GBF is the main financial mechanism as per the third article. And in Article 7, we would like to add the following, that the GEF must provide effective and full use of the Convention's financial mechanism to all participants and to all parties as per the established rules and not on the basis of political decisions. This is essential in order to have the framework implemented fully. And not having access to the GEF will put into question and jeopardize full participation by all of the possible participants. And so it is important to show the role of business as well and the financial sector in the implementation of the framework. And we would like to add another point to D, but as I am running out of time, I will put these proposals in writing on the Secretariat site in order that you may see in writing what our proposals are. Thank you.
Thank you, Russian Republic. Now I will give the floor to Ethiopia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Ethiopia also supports the statement made by the DRC on behalf of African region. However, we have some slight comments as regards the paragraph 3 of the draft decision, especially at the beginning of this paragraph. It says, also notes that, and goes on the written. I think we have to say that we have to add the term recognized rather than also notes. And further, under this paragraph, we also would like to add two additional points. That is, the first one, which goes to scientific, technical, and technological cooperation. And the second one is education and knowledge management. And finally, we have some comment as regards paragraph 6, which states about international financial institutions, but not mentioned regional and sub-regional sources. So it should have to include regional and sub-regional financial institutes rather than specifically mentioning the regional development banks. It is better to address in generic term so as to include some other financial institutions at regional and sub-regional level. Thank you.
Thank you, Ethiopia. I'll now give the floor to Argentina, followed by Peru and Bolivia. Argentina.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Co-Chair. At this first reading of the draft elements for possible COP decision, I'm afraid there's a lot of feedback. We'll start again. At this first reading of the draft elements for possible decision for the COP for the global framework, we agree with comments made by various regional groups and delegations. Namely, we agree that this decision will need to be reviewed at a later date, and thus we will make some comments at a future date. Notwithstanding this, we would like to make some preliminary comments, and in fact we have 4 of these to make. Firstly, the Global Framework is an ambitious document which aspires to relaunch our convention more than 30 years after its adoption in 1992. In this respect, we suggest that we should include a preambular paragraph that recalls the principles adopted at the birth of our convention, as well as the principles in the Rio Declaration and in Article 3 of the convention. Secondly, on many occasions, we have already mentioned the need to implement the convention in a way that respects the balance between its 3 objectives. This requirement should be included in the preambular part, given that the global framework is an instrument to implement the CBD. Thirdly, we think that the first paragraph should describe the GBF as a flexible framework for parties to implement the convention. It should also point out that this implementation will take place in accordance with national priorities and capacities and the resources provided through the strategy for resource mobilization. Fourthly, we consider that until we have reached agreements in subst and SVI, those that are mentioned in subparagraphs 3A to F, this section should be completely put between square brackets. Notwithstanding this, we reiterate our preference to adopt strategies related to means of implementation in the same decision that will adopt the global framework and should be put as additional annexes. As we've pointed out on many occasions, it is not possible to separate ambitious targets from the resources needed to implement them. By way of summary, we will send these preliminary comments in writing and reserve our right to suggest additional modifications at future meetings. Thank you.
To Peru, followed by Japan. Peru, you have the floor.
Gracias, señor copresidente.
Thank you, co-chair. Can you hear me? We would like to thank you for the proposed elements for possible decision for the COP. And we would like to make certain suggestions that will be related to various paragraphs of this possible decision. In paragraph 5, we would like to include something, namely, after improving or enhancements to existing mechanisms in English, we would like to add through indicators that report on progress in achieving the target. We would also like to add a new paragraph. The interpreter points out it's after paragraph 5. And this is the text. Invites the United Nations General Assembly to consider the analysis on the contribution of the targets of the Global Biodiversity Plan to achieve the Sustainable Development Objectives. Coming on now to paragraph 6. After the reference to economies in transition, we would include in order to strengthen technical and financial resources for, and we continue, for implementation. Then in paragraph 9, Just a small suggestion there, which we believe is relevant. So after the reference to the private sector, we wish to add the financial sector. Coming on now to paragraph 10. Instead, after as appropriate, we would include to complement and support national actions, or rather national efforts, in order to contribute to the implementation of the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Then finally, on paragraph 12, we would like to add something where we would say, in coordination with relevant responsible sectors, agriculture, fisheries, and environment, to generate and develop the necessary synergies for coherent and complementary implementation of the Convention and post-2020 GBF. And that would be added after country level in paragraph 12. And then we would then continue with the rest of the paragraph. And co-chair, we support decisively what has been said by Colombia and Mexico. Thank you very much. Thank you, co-chair.
I'll ask parties to try to respect the time. Otherwise, we're going to have to cut people, and I would not want to do that. Japan, you have the floor. Japan?
Hello.
We can hear you.
Okay, so
If Japan is not, there is technical difficulties, maybe I'll ask staff to assist them, and I'll move to Chile. Chile followed by Japan. Chile, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señor copresidente.
Thank you very much, co-chair. Chile think there's still uncertainty about the path to come, even if this draft should be complemented and enriched by contributions from Substa 24 and SPI 13. Clarity is still lacking about the specific outcomes to be achieved from this meeting and whether or not there will be another virtual session in November and its characteristics. Likewise, the dynamic that's been used in the past few days has not allowed us to actually envisage minimum agreements being reached on the structure, connectivity, and coherence of the GBF, far less reaching agreements on headline indicators or on the baseline, nor on the importance of having a comprehensive implementation that is linked up with the real needs posed by the environmental and climate crisis that we're facing. Given the many pending steps, we agree with Norway and Switzerland and others. We don't think it's appropriate at this time to make specific comments on the proposed draft decision in Annex 1. We will wait until a later meeting to share our opinion on this matter. Co-chairs, if you allow us, we would like to refer to the balancing exercise that we're trying to carry out. We'd like to thank colleagues for their flexibility and delegates to try and find the better way and the best way to work. And we recognise the difficulty of holding virtual meetings, especially on substantive items. But we do believe that bodies such as this could use digital tools and technology to speed up and modernise these processes, always geared towards the importance and the need to make progress and maintain our momentum. In this respect, we regret that we have not agreed on a clear working arrangement for all the contact groups. and that the 36 hours beforehand rule for non-papers has not always been respected, and that work in the contact groups and the post-2020 framework has just focused on compiling text suggestions without allowing space to discuss the underlying rationale or react to other parties' impressions. We're moving towards the COP15 Kunming, and I think we really need to have in-person negotiations. So we thank Switzerland for the opportunity to hold a meeting in Geneva in January, and we hope that there will soon be confirmation of this from the Secretariat, including the modalities for the work and all what will happen with vaccines, quarantines, and other associated measures related to COVID-19. Finally, we believe that, as has been said by Colombia and Mexico, that we have to assess the temporal scope, the timing of the plan, in order to have an actual decade to implement it, namely a whole decade after it's adopted. We insist on the need to adopt the post-2020 GBF at COP15 together with at least the main headline indicators and an appropriate implementation framework that will then contribute to achieving the Convention's objectives and will allow us as humanity to live within planetary boundaries without exceeding points of no return and in line with achieving our vision of living in harmony with nature. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's turn back to Japan. If the floor can be given to Japan, please go ahead, Keiichi.
Yes, thanks. And can you hear me?
Very well.
Hello. Okay, thanks. Thank you, co-chairs. And Japan would like to appreciate the co-chairs and the colleagues of the contact groups for their dedication in leading us in the discussion. As other parties pointed out, Japan believes that we need to deepen our discussion on the decision draft at a later stage. However, as our preliminary view, Japan would like to offer you our current reflection on the draft. First, operational paragraph 5 mentions the development of additional mechanisms or enhancements to existing mechanisms that enables parties to meet their commitments. But we would like the Secretariat to clarify what these additional mechanisms or enhancements specifically mean. Second, we would like to edit the beginning of operational paragraph 6 in line with similar text in previous decisions under the CBD. Third, in operational paragraph 13, we would like to propose an amendment so that relevant international organizations will have opportunities to provide their input for their work of the Environment Management Group and the Biodiversity Liaison Group. Fourth, operational paragraph 14C requests the development of guidance materials, but we would like this to refer to the sharing of best practices related to the implementation of the framework, rather than the identification of specific actions. Any provision of information and guidance should involve updating of national biodiversity strategies and action plans, and as such, we propose specific edits in that regard. Japan has historically assisted parties in capacity building and development in drafting and implementing their NBSAPs, and consider such assistance important. Finally, as proposed in operational paragraph 3b, we support the idea that the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework will be supported by the updated Plan of Action on Substantial Governments, cities, and other local authorities for biodiversity. We will submit our statement along with specific text edits in writing and look forward to further detailed discussion on this agenda in Geneva next January. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Japan. I will now give the floor to Bolivia, followed by Costa Rica. Bolivia, tiene la palabra.
Gracias, co-presidente.
Thank you, co-chair. Bolivia would like to highlight the difficulties that we have with virtual meetings as part of this process. So we are very much in favour of having in-person meetings. With virtual sessions, there's enormous limits in terms of participation for developing countries, and in particular for delegations of IPLCs. Moreover, the working methodology in this virtual meeting has been a real challenge in all of the contact groups. It's been hard to get a balance and transparency. Coming on now to this particular subject under discussion, Bolivia believes that we can very much affirm what's been said by the African group and other countries. Namely, we need to be ambitious, but we cannot give specific comments yet on this draft. Once we have concluded the negotiations of the GBF, of course, we'll be able to make more comments, but for the moment we can make general comments without prejudice to other comments that we could make at future negotiations leading to this decision. First of all, the GBF post-2020 should be implemented by the parties who have got legally binding obligations under the CBD Convention. And this has to be done in a balanced way, taking account of the three objectives of the CBD Convention. Secondly, implementation of the Convention and its protocols and the post-2020 GBF and any other additional enhanced mechanism related to this should take place in accordance with the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, including when it comes to financial resources. Then thirdly, full and effective participation of Indigenous peoples and local communities is essential because they are the best keepers and custodians of biodiversity. So it's important to draw on their traditional knowledge in line with Article 8J. Fourthly, implementation of biodiversity actions should consider it in a holistic both the Convention and its protocols and the upcoming post-2020 GBF. The global framework has to support the implementation of the CBD rather than substituting or supplanting the CBD. And fifthly, there's the role of other agreements and processes and other relevant organizations is in fact to support the implementation of the Convention on Biodiversity and the GBF at a national level. Thank you very much, Co-Chair, and I'm afraid we did not have that text.
Muchas gracias, Bolivia. I understand the interpreters would be delighted if you could post the text. I will now give the floor to Costa Rica, which is the last party on my list. Therefore, I will turn after that to major stakeholder group, then to observers. Costa Rica, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señor copresidente.
Thank you very much, Co-Chair. On the work that's been carried out on OEWG3, we'd like to thank the Secretariat for its work, as well as the work of the co-leads and the contact groups for making progress. We haven't lost a minute, in spite of the limits imposed upon us by virtual meetings. It would be very useful if we took account of the fact that all the contact groups could have had the same format and if the outcomes had been clearly set out from the outset, and there would need to be an effort made for documents to be prepared in advance. The time available to us is running out, so we have to find spaces that allow us to meet in person. As pointed out by other countries, we're happy to hear that we're considering in-person meetings. However, as long as the pandemic is not fully under control, we cannot take lightly the decision to meet in person. Costa Rica requires more information on facilities for its delegation, such as which vaccines will be accepted, quarantine arrangements for official delegates, amongst other elements. We support Chile, Mexico, Colombia, and others in their comments on the integrity of the post-2020 framework and the importance of maintaining coherence between all of its various elements, such as the goals, targets, and indicators. Therefore, we must take account also of the SBI and Substa products that are still awaiting agreement. As co-chairs of the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People, we wish to highlight the importance of the 30 by 30 target, restoration and its linkages with other targets. We support Chile and other countries on the need to analyse the effective decade available for implementing the GBF. We don't have 10 years for implementation, but basically just 8. And this is a fact that we need to deal with by taking the best decision to achieve our ambition in a realistic way. Thank you very much, Co-Chair.
I see now on my list IPLC, IIFP. IPLC, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señor.
Thank you, co-chairs. First of all, the IIFP would like to thank the parties who have supported our proposals in the contact groups. The IIFP wishes to make certain comments. In paragraph 3, the IIFP suggests that we should add letter G, the programme of work for Article 8G and the related provisions, and its global plan of action on customary sustainable use. The programme of work for Article 8G and related provisions and its global plan of action on customary sustainable use adopted in decision Roman 12/12b will contribute to implementation of the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. The IFB also suggests that we should add a paragraph 7 bis after paragraph 7, which would read as follows. 7 bis, request to the developed country parties, governments, international financial institutions to support Indigenous peoples and local communities initiatives, contribute to the implementation of the post-2020 GBF. Indigenous peoples and local communities are making a great effort to conserve biodiversity and they require financial support. Given the practical limitations around virtual negotiations, including the fact that it's more difficult to have bilateral dialogue, the IFB is requesting parties to support this proposed text, and we reiterate once again our interest in continuing in our dialogue in order to ensure the adoption of an ambitious and realistic framework that includes the proposals of Indigenous peoples and local communities. And so the IFB is asking the working group and the Secretariat to actively promote the participation of IPLCs in all of the processes related to the GBF, such as formal and informal meetings, thematic consultations, and capacity building workshops, and others that are going to be held up to the in-person working group meeting, as well as COP15, including the high-level session. We have to bear in mind that more positive actions still need to be specified in order for Indigenous peoples and local communities' participation to become truly full and effective as laid down in the COP decisions of the Convention. Thank you very much, co-chairs.
Thank you very much. I'm asked to notify you that the statement in the previous agenda item from WCSD has received support. I will now ask one more time if there is any organization that want to take the floor. And while, yes, I see one. I see WWF International. WWF, if you can enable your microphone, and you will be given the floor. Please give the floor. Go ahead, WWF. Is there anything we can do to facilitate? On my screen, everything seems to be working fine, but I can't see you. Okay, so
can you hear
go
me?
ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead now.
Thank you, Co-Chair. WWF believes that all elements necessary for the implementation of the framework should be agreed at COP15 as part of a package which will enable the immediate start of implementation after its adoption. In this regard, we would like to make 3 preliminary proposals for the COP decision, while we are aware that much about this decision will depend on the evolution of the GBF negotiations. Firstly, in the introductory paragraphs, the COP decision should recognize that the implementation of the GBF is required by parties to fulfill their obligations under the Convention, and that parties should adopt necessary legislation and regulations to ensure the achievement of the GBF targets, missions, and goals. Secondly, with regards to paragraph 3, relevant other COP decisions, we believe that enhancing synergies amongst biodiversity-related conventions and with the Sustainable Development Goals is an important objective of the framework. We propose that specific proposals to enable these synergies should be adopted at COP15 in a separate COP decision to complement relevant and welcome text in the framework. For these 2 proposals, we have text suggestions which we will post in the chat box, and we're seeking support from parties for these suggestions. And our third proposal is about paragraph 5 of the draft COP decision, which opens the door to a postponement to COP16 of a decision on elements of the implementation mechanism. We're worried that this would lead to a delay in the full implementation of the framework, and we call on parties to recognize that the implementation mechanism is a critical component of the GBF which cannot be postponed until after COP15, and to clarify what additional mechanisms or enhancements to existing mechanisms will be considered at COP16. Thank you.
This now, I see now one more, and that will be the last. I see ANR UCCLAN. Oh, disappeared now. Okay, colleagues. I heard a number of you talking and expressing some concern and asking about some of the logistical aspect around the upcoming face-to-face meeting in Switzerland. We are working to, actually the Secretariat is leading the work on the logistics and is working with the Swiss government and with UN agency on logistical matters. And they're working with us, the SUBSTA and SBI chair, and we'll be bringing some of the organizational aspects to the Bureau for their consideration. We hope to be able to provide on Friday at the closing plenary with an update, which will be providing you with some detail on that. With that, distinguished delegates, this brings us to the end of our work for today. I would like to remind delegates that contact group on agenda item 4, post-2020 GBF, target 1 to 8, will hold its next meeting tomorrow, Wednesday, from 7 to 10 Montreal time, and will be ably led by Teona Karchava and Alfred Otangyeboa of Ghana. Following that, there will be contact group 3 on target 9 to 13 that will take place from 11 to 1400 Montreal time. This work will be led by Gillian Guthrie of Jamaica and Andy Scott from the United Kingdom. We continue to encourage you to consult the CBD website and app for details. Thank you very much for your participation and understanding today and your patience. In a moment, we'll be adjourning the meeting and at our next and final plenary on Friday, you'll get the final report, possibly, if we can, some of the logistical detail you asked for, and we'll consider any other matters to approve at the first pass of the report. So before closing, I'll turn briefly to the Secretariat to see if there is any announcements that needs to be made. Secretariat?
No, thank you. I
Thank
think
you.
we covered all.
Thank you very much. The meeting is adjourned.